All right, good morning, everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and get started with our AM Tech session. Today we have Tim Noack and Loretta Mokry here from Plummer. They're gonna be presenting to us for this technical session. I'll give a brief intro and then they'll go ahead and take over from here. Tim Noack is a registered professional engineer and principal with Plummer Associates, Inc. He leads the natural systems practice and has over 30 years of civil and environmental engineering experience. Tim has served as principal in charge or project manager on numerous treatment and wetland projects ranging in size from 1.8 to 2,000 acres, with a combined construction cost of over $80 million. Applications have included treatment wetlands for municipal and industrial wastewaters, polishing for indirect potable and direct non-potable reuse, polishing of trophic lake water, and restoration and creation of wetlands for compensatory mitigation and habitat improvement. Tim has also provided training approved by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality for wastewater treatment operators running treatment and wetland systems. Loretta Mokry has over 43 years of experience in environmental and ecological studies, including constructed wetlands, wetland delineation, Section 404 permitting, mitigation plan development, implementation and compliance monitoring, threatened and endangered species surveys, NEPA compliant environmental assessments, water quality studies, stormwater permits, non-point source elevations, and environmental site assessments with various clients. So now I'll pass it both to Tim and Loretta for their presentation.
Thanks, Paul. All right, appreciate everybody's attendance this morning. I have one quick question. Has anybody in the room been to the East Fork wetland? Well, I'm very glad for that. All right, Loretta and I will be presenting on this project. And here's some of the areas we're going to cover. I'll provide a little history and background on the project and get into some of the engineering on the wetland. I'm going to hand it over to Loretta. She'll talk about vegetation design, environmental permitting, and then some thoughts on the overall project. Now, the project's been in operation for about 13 and a half years, 14 years. And so on all of these topics, we're going to provide some lessons learned that we've run across through the years. So East Fork Wetland is owned and operated by the North Texas Municipal Water District. They provide drinking water, wastewater treatment, and solid waste services for over 2 million people in their service area. Their service area covers multiple counties, and it's shown in this gray area there. And with respect to water supply, their primary water supplies for surface water reservoirs. And we've shown them here. They have water rights in Lavon Lake, Texhoma, Tawakoni, Chapman Lake, and then recently completed is Bodark Lake up in Fannin County. Now, the project we're speaking about today is the East Fork Water Reuse Project. That's comprised of the wetlands and then the Trinity River Mainst pump station pipeline. And that's shown down here in this circle down here south in Kaufman County. Now, this is an indirect potable reuse project. And if you're unfamiliar with what that is, I'll walk you through that. So up here, we have Lavon Lake, and again, the district has water rights there, and their main water treatment plant is at Wiley, shown there. Fourth water is diverted from the lake, treated to drinking water standards, distributed throughout the service area, and then a portion of that comes back as wastewater. That flows to the wastewater treatment plants, which are shown with these orange dots, and then that's treated to quality that their permit requires. Discharged, these on the south are discharged into tributaries of East Fork of the Trinity River. And then those up here that discharge into Lake Ray Hubbard, which is a city of Dallas lake, the district and the city have an agreement to allow that equivalent volume of water to pass through and flow down into the East Fork Trinity. So that water then flows down to a diversion point located adjacent to the constructed wetland, and the district diverts a portion of that effluent into the wetland where suspended solids and nutrients are removed, improving the quality of the water before it's pumped back up to Lavon Lake, about 43.5 miles. And it's pumped up, as the diagram shows, to the upper reach of this easternmost arm. And that water then spends about a year detention time in the reservoir before it finally makes its way back to the water treatment plant. During that time, it has undergoes further treatment and then mixing with other waters that come into the lake. Now, the district also has purchased water rights from the Trinity River Authority, and then that's discharged from the Metroplex. That water flows down the Mainst, Trinity, and then it's diverted down here at the Mainst pump station, pumped into the wetland, through the wetland and back. And so that really comprises the overall project. So this is a Google Earth of the East Fork wetland. We have the river here shown in blue. It flows from north to south. You have US 175 there, kind of splitting the north and central section. If you keep going to the west, you'll run to Seagoville and ultimately Dallas. So this is south east of Dallas. Water is diverted from the river using the diversion pump station, and it flows into 3 sedimentation basins where solids can settle out there. We have 3 wetland cells north of 175. That water then collects and flows into 11 wetland cells in this central section where we have 3 wetland trains. That water then again comes together in the south section and is distributed into 4 trains of wetland cells with 10 cells total. Then lastly, that is collected and flows down to the conveyance pump station where it's pumped back up to Lavon. Now, we have a stormwater drainage system that prevents offsite water from entering the wetland. It's diverted around the wetland and into the river. And then also you can see we have some levees that were pre-existing that we're using to protect it from river flooding. The system itself sits on about a 2,000 acre footprint, and the wetted area, which is we consider the treatment area, is 1,840 acres. So it's a very large wetland, one of the largest in the country, in fact, for this purpose. So here's some aerial shots. This shows the river intake, the diversion pump station, and the 3 set basins, wetland cells, the highway, and then the central section you can see here. And then now we're looking at the central section with the river here in the foreground. Then now we're looking from south to north. This is the south section. The water flows through these cells, collected, and comes into this terminal pond, picked up by the conveyance pump station, but pumped back up to Lavon. This is the outfall at Lake Lavon, and this photograph was taken during construction or right after construction, and the lake was down about 15 feet below conservation pool. And so they were able to lay all this riprap in the drive, which was beneficial at that time. Construction, but not so good for water supply. So here you have the main stem pump station, an aerial view of it, and showing the pumps there. And then we have a 4-bay, different from the East Fork wetland, which allows solids to settle out there. All right, just talking about some background and history of the project. This project actually began in 2003. The board authorized it in August of that year. During that time, there was an urgent need for water that the district had. They were undergoing a tremendous growth of population in their service area. And of course, the water demand increased along with that population. That was coupled with some persistent droughts that were going on back then. And so the reservoirs were down. It was putting the district in a bind. They had some drought contingency measures implemented, and water conservation measures were also being implemented. They needed another water supply to meet the overall demand. Water Lake was not available for many years off into the future. And so this project really was the best opportunity to have a significant amount of water available in a short period of time. And so this project was fast-tracked. The goal was to have it planned, the site acquired, permitted, designed, constructed, and producing water within 5 years. Now consider that with, in comparison to the reservoir, you're talking decades. And so this was a pretty big undertaking. Goal was December 2008 and final completion the following year in 09. So the district elected to go with a design bid build delivery approach. And we subdivided that up into 11 projects. And we had a different design team assigned for each of those projects. So we could all work in parallel. There was a lot of communication back and forth. This shows some of the project milestones. Again, we had a notice to proceed early in 04 for the design and permitting team. The district acquired a site in early 04. The permitting team got on it very quickly, submitted the 404 application in mid 04, and then about 15 months later, they had their permit in hand, which was a tremendous undertaking. Loretta will speak about that later in this presentation and also over the luncheon presentation. All the design packages were completed in early 2006, and that also included designing of 2 early on-site nurseries. And we'll also talk about why we needed those. Notice to proceed for the various projects where it was in 06, they had a construction period. And then the wetland was substantially complete in late 09, and we began producing water in January of 09. So we met our goals of having it water produced quickly within about a 5-year period. Project cost in 2009 was $280 million, and that included both pump stations, the pipeline, the wetland, and then all the other ancillary costs such as design, legal, permitting, and so on. The Mainst pump station was completed in 2019, and again, that's almost half that cost as the 2009. So you can see how prices escalated during that time period. But in spite of all that, the cost of raw water produced from the project is very reasonable, 74 cents per 1,000 gallon. And if you compare that to water produced from a new reservoir, it's more than twice that to 328 a 1,000 gallons. So very cost effective water supply for the district. As far as performance, this project's provided 143 billion gallons pumped up to Lake Lavon. And then you can see the tons of constituents removed from the water before it went up to Lavon. I'm going to kind of pivot and talk about how some of the engineering aspects of converting a 2,000 acre working cattle ranch over to a functioning wetland in about 5 years' time. So to do that, of course, being a water supply project, everything circled or focused around the amount of water that would be produced from the project. So that was the main design basis that everything came from. And so we had some projections available, or projections made rather, available on the available effluent in the river itself. And you can see how they went up and peaked at 2015. And so our flow rates were based on this projected amount of effluent for diversion of that year. We analyzed that and developed 3 different flow regimes into the wetland. We had a low treatment flow, a normal treatment flow, and a peak treatment flow. And you see the million gallons per day for each of those. 24 to 48, 107, which was later reduced to 91 MGD. The 91 MGD is what we used through the remainder of design, but you can see we have a wide range, 24 to 165 MGD that we had to design this for. So that was challenging at times. So normally, you know, the inflow rate, which we covered in the previous slide, inflow concentration, which we had looked at some of the data that was available within the river. And then based on that, you identify the treatment goals for your outflow concentration, and then you work into how big a wetland can be, what you size your wetland. Well, we didn't have that in this case. We had a limited footprint, a 2,000 acre easement that the project had to fit on. We just needed to maximize the treatment area within that footprint. And so what we ended up doing was to use that as our treatment area and then back into the outflow concentrations, kind of the reverse. But so here's what we had, you know, wide range of flow, wetted area 1840. And then this was the projected effluent quality based on this period of record. And we used three different water quality models to project the concentrations of total suspended solids, total nitrogen, and total phosphorus coming out of the system. And then use best professional judgment to kind of bracket that into a range of what you see here. And of those, the phosphorus is really what we focused on because that's more or less the controlling nutrient there in Lake Lavon for algae. Again, being a water supply project, hydraulics is everything. We worked through a monthly water balance and looked at inflows and outflows from the system, identifying the expected water loss that we would have for every month of the year, which was helpful in determining the quantity that we would pump back, but also the quality too, because certain constituents will increase in concentration, of course, when you have evaporative loss. And so that was a necessary step as well. Then we did kind of your normal civil engineering for water control structures, but the wetland cells themselves, we wanted to manage the water with a range of 6 to 18 inches in depth over that wide range of flows, which was kind of a challenge. We wanted minimal adjustments for the gates by the operator. And so what we settled on was that structures flowing into these wetland trains and out of the trains, we needed 30 feet of weir. And we were able to accomplish that using 3 10-foot rectangular weir gates. And that really allowed the water level upstream and the downstream to be within their desired range. Again, we produced a hydraulic profile through the system from the set basins all the way down the conveyance pump station through every wetland train and through all the flow ranges. And we used, of course, the conventional equations and approaches for your open channels, for your pipes, your weirs, and so on. But flow through the wetland cell, projecting that water profile through the wetland cells was not so widely known. And we actually applied an equation that they used in the Everglades area for the big stormwater treatment areas there. It's an empirically derived equation for projecting the water surface elevation at various flows, either in dense or sparse vegetation. So that's what was used here to kind of fill in the blanks between your conventional areas. So the train and cell layout is also important. We wanted to flow by gravity from the the diversion to the conveyance pump station, maximize treatment area, again, exclude stormwater, and have hydraulically efficient cells. And by that, I mean, we wanted to use every square foot of wetted area and allow water to flow through that, because if water doesn't flow through that, you obviously don't have any treatment improvement. So the approach we adopted was to have a single inflow point and then a deep water zone immediately thereafter that allowed the water to spread out across the full width of the cell. And then we had a shallow marsh area where we had sheet flow, basically the 6 to 18 inches of water. And then we had an intermediate deep zone. The purpose of that, kind of twofold for these deep zones, they were the borrow area for the levees or the berms, but also hydraulically, they served the purpose of redistributing the water across the cell. So if you had a short circuit here, it at least provided an opportunity to recapture that and spread it out. And then lastly, we had an exit deep water zone and then a single gate structure between the cells. Large earthwork project, obviously, we didn't have any goals of hauling dirt in or hauling dirt out, so it was all balanced on site. And again, it was sort of that iterative process between your hydraulic grade line and your cut fill balancing. So that was a process that went through on the site civil design. We also spec'd out precision graded marsh areas, and then we had a slightly sloped bottom that varied from 3/10 to 1.5 feet, depending on which cell degree. All right, flipping to lessons learned. Okay, fast forward 14 years, and what have we learned since design was completed? Well, things change. We projected a 91 MGD average inflow, and the actual we observed through this period is about 33 MGD, about a half, or about a third of that. There's a reason for that. There were persistent droughts, so base flow into the river was reduced significantly. And all those water conservation measures that the district implemented really worked. So we didn't have as much effluent coming back into the river system. So this is what we had. So you can see most of the flow. This is the inflow and MGD. Here's our goal, 91 MGD. And this is 2010 and 2023 period of operation. You can see most of it kind of falls well under the 91 MGD. We also had some periods of shutdown when the reservoir was full, so we did want to bump back up to there. Here's another way to look at it. This is a flow exceedance frequency curve, have inflow and MGD, and our design flow at 91 MGD. Basically, we exceeded that only 3% of the history of the project so far. So again, it just points out in a different way we've had much lower flow. So on cell hydraulics, we learned that the combination of the slope cells and the low flow caused water to really be much shallower at the upper end than anticipated and cool up at the lower end. This really affected the vegetative community because some plants will tolerate deeper water than others. And so the lower end here, the plants that could not tolerate deep water basically were drowned out, and we had to replace a lot of those with giant boulders. We had projected that we would have somewhere between this M2 profile and this normal depth. But in reality, we found that because we were pumping about a third, we were in between this M1 profile and a level pool most of the time. Just makes sense at a lower flow rate. We found that the deep water zones and the precision grading did do a great job of distributing the water across the width of the cell and making them more efficient hydraulically. But sometimes we would have a short circuit form. We found that the low flow really concentrated in that short circuit, and then you had a fairly significant dead zone as a result of that. So it's important for those to be corrected whenever they pop up. Also, extended low flow periods, we took cells offline to reduce evaporative loss. That didn't really affect the vegetation of those cells because it really mimics the hydro periods of natural wetlands and also provided an opportunity for the district to perform maintenance of those cells. So it wasn't a bad thing. All right, water quality. This is just a table, again, looking at TSS, nitrogen, and phosphorus with the projected and actual concentrations flowing in and out, and then the mass removed and concentration removed. Now we found that for TSS, back up. The projected and the actual coming in was relatively similar. However, we were producing more TSS coming out of the system than projected, and there's a reason for that, or reasons for that we'll go over in a moment. Nitrogen and phosphorus, because we had less base flow into the river, it was really dominated by effluent from the upstream wastewater plants. And so what we saw as far as nitrogen concentrations and phosphorus concentrations, they were very close to what was being discharged from the treatment plants upstream. We saw, even though the total nitrogen was about twice expected, we still had really good removal of that. And then on phosphorus, we trended also towards the upper end of the range, but actually we had many occasions where we had 3, 4, and even 5 milligrams per liter coming into the system, which was much higher than anticipated on that range. In spite of all that, we had about 50% concentration reduction and 55% mass removal. All right, just looking at TSS, some of the things we learned about that. This is a snapshot of January of 2011 through June of 2011. And we have the river flows on the y-axis on the right-hand side, which are this red line, and then the concentration of TSS flowing into, represented by the blue bars, and out of the wetland by these hollow white bars. And so you can see coming in, we had more or less base flow with a couple of little rain events. TSS was fairly well in hand there. But you got a big river flow event, some peak flows, and it really stirs it up as you might expect in the Trinity River. Very high TSS during those peaking events. We found that the TSS during those peaking events was taken out very efficiently through the set basins, as you might expect. We had larger particles in the water column that settled out nicely. But the rest of the time, we had colloidal type solids and algae that were diverted in that didn't really settle out. That was also taken out in the wetland downstream, but here's the reason, one of the reasons we had higher outflow TSS is that carp made its way into the system, became established. You know, they're bottom feeders, they like to stir things up. And so they had really impacted the water quality, especially the TSS. On the nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, we have the mass removed on the y-axis there. By season, we have the overall spring, summer, fall, and winter, and the nitrogen's in blue, and phosphorus is in this red. Nitrogen really removal in a treatment wetland is both microbial and plant uptake are kind of the primary mechanisms. And so as you would expect, we see kind of the seasonality of nitrogen removal, and that's what we observed. Phosphorus also has some removal through microbial activity and plant uptake, but there are several other mechanisms for removing phosphorus that are not temperature dependent. And so we saw that more or less remaining constant, and that's pretty much what you would see in other treatment wetland systems. So this was no different from the others. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Loretta. She's going to talk about vegetation and permitting.
You're dealing with a natural treatment system, especially a wetland. Plants are very important. They provide a lot of the structure within the water column, as well as organic carbon for the microbial population to colonize and support their growth. So our goal is to have a very diverse, dense, aquatic macrofauna community. Emergent plants in particular is what we want, but we also need submerged aquatics. About 80% of the constructed wetland is emergent marsh. The rest of it's in the deep water zones that Tim mentioned, and that works together with the deep water zones to have the dense vegetation immediately downstream of them that helps facilitate that dispersion of flow across. The challenge when you're doing a 2,000-acre wetland is that you need a whole lot of plants in a very short period of time. So you really can't rely on natural colonization. We needed the system to be up and producing high quality water as quickly as possible. So our approach was to look at propagating those plants on site. We had 1.8 million plant plugs. All of these were hand planted across the 2,000 acres. Wetland design, we did a phase 1 nursery to be able to propagate first the plants that we couldn't see on site with bunker sands, and actually developed several restoration areas for duck habitat that had some aquatic plants within it, but again, we were in drought. So we looked at 9 species that we brought in from commercial nurseries, mainly from Panhandle of Florida, be able to have something that was somewhat acclimated to the same climate that we had here. Produce those in the first nursery, then those were transplanted to the phase 2 nursery, much larger, about 190 acres. And we also harvested some plants from those duck habitat cells. So we had 18 species total, and that's what was used to propagate all the plants that were used to plant full-scale wetlands. We actually began planting in January of 2007, and about 85% of the plants were planted in the middle of winter. So it's also good to have the plants on site that you're harvesting from. Nurseries don't like to get plants to you in the middle of winter. This was the phase 1 plant nursery. You can see the initial planting. This one was actually outside the footprint of the constructed wetland. We used an area that's now called Bunker's Pond. It was another habitat area that Bunker had developed. Started planting in October of 2004. In less than a year, it looks like this. Wetland plants are very productive, and when you do them with good nutrient-rich water, You feel like you have a green thumb. This was the phase 2 nursery. We got permission from the Corps to actually develop 2 cells within what became Train 6. These areas didn't infect any of our natural wetlands at on site. Again, this was planted in summer 2006. We started planting to the full-scale wetland in January 2007. This is what it looks like when we're planting in nurseries and when we plant full-scale system 2. Each row is planted on 4-foot centers. The rows are 10 foot apart. So you can see it's pretty sparse looking up there. And you have a couple of little stems sticking up. Within 3 to 6 months, this is what it looks like. So you've got a green thumb when you're planting wetland plants with good nutrient-rich water. However, then we had Nutria. Nutria are rodents, and they breed like rodents. And when they first came in, I saw them at the phase 1 nursery. It took me 6 years to convince the district management people that the operators absolutely had to have the ability to be able to remove Nutria. In that time, they pretty much wiped out all the initial plantings. $2.6 million worth of plantings. Ongoing population management continues today. After we finally got things under control, there were a whole lot of nutrient cleared out in 2010. We've been gaining ground ever since. The other thing that came in, as Tim mentioned, was carp. They come in through the pumps with a little bitty fry. First, maybe 6 months of their life, they're subject to predation from birds. Then they get too big and be able to be eaten. And then they start spawning in the wetland. A mature carp will produce about 3 million eggs per year. You can see with the photo here on the left, this was a deep water zone where our TSS was over 100, about 135. The operator's got a couple of pumps and they can drain down a cell. And they pump out the deep water zone to basically expose those carp. Natural predation takes effect. And then we were able to put water back in, and you got 13 milligrams per liter. Substantial difference. The other thing that the carp do is they affect the vegetative cover. They are bottom feeders. They'll knock out a lot of the softer tissue plants. But as they're feeding across the bottom and they're ingesting the organic matter, they're basically pumping through their digestive system phosphorus right back into the water column. So they dramatically affect the system performance. So that both affects not only TSS, but our nutrient loading within the system. We also have some other invasive plants. Within one of the duck habitat cells, there was water lotus. This is this plant down here. It's very aggressive. The waterfowl come in to feed off of the seeds. They basically have planted water lotus in almost every cell that we have out there. How do we compete with that? We don't want to be spraying a whole lot of extra chemicals that would kill all the other desirable plants that we have in here. So what we've been doing is planting plants that are robust enough to be able to compete with that, primarily the giant bulrush and Holmes bulrush. And we've been pretty successful in knocking it back. Another plant that comes in the upper ends of the cell where it's really shallow water with these slow bottom cells is climbing incline. We like to just try to cover over and smother the emergent plants that we have there. So what we do that is we do prescribed burns. Again, we don't want to come in there and spray or anything that would kill everything that we're trying to do. So what they're doing is doing prescribed burns during the winter time, and that helps control the climbing incline as well as getting the new growth to come back in. So one of the questions that's always asking, well, it's a wetland, you know, all this natural stuff going on out there, you don't really have to do any management, do you? But yes, there is ongoing management. As we've gone through the last 14 years, there's some things that we have learned that are a little bit more aggressive in doing management. We do woody vegetation control with the shallow water in that wind. We get a lot of willows, cottonwood, some other woody vegetation, Chinese tallow has been an invasive. So the operators have equipment now where they can actually get out across the 200-acre cell and get to where they are and spray those and keep them down. You don't want woody vegetation because the roots can penetrate the liner and cause a lot of seepage, as well as they have a lot more water loss through their ET. This is the prescribed burn. You can see it's in the middle of winter when everything's down. You get thatch that builds up with the fall emergent plant. If you can get that burned off in winter, hold it for just a little bit, to liquid solid stuff with the ash. Then you get a lot of robust growth from the emergent plants the next spring. So that helps. One of the other exotic invasives that requires a lot of management is feral lawns. They thought being built was just for them. And they can do a whole lot of damage within the cells as well as on the levees. I mean, their rooting tears everything up. So now that's controlled with tractor. Trying to get back on top of them. Just quickly, let me go through some of the permitting. This was a fast track project, as Tim mentioned, and that requires a lot of coordination. We had multiple permits, federal permits, state permits, and in addition to those, the local federation construction permits. The federal permits, we had both section 404 for the initial project components, and that first project was an individual permit. So we started out working through this, and I'll go through a little bit more detail how we got that to move through as quickly as possible. We also had a section 408 permit because we had crossings of the core flood control levees as well as pipeline crossing at Lavon federal property up there at Lavon Lake. For the Mainst pump station, again, we had to do those 404 and 408. I'll go into a little bit more detail, but we were able to do that under a regional general permit request. The state permit for the initial project was a water rights permit. There was a lot of coordination with the state working with that and getting that done. Even we were under construction trying to get that through. But we also had the 401 Marsh holding certification that has to accompany your 404 permits. For the local permits, you got 43.5 miles of this 84-inch diameter pipeline across 3 counties, 2 interstate highways, multiple streams, and some railroads along the way. Required over a mile of tunneling and 189 easements that had to be coordinated as we were working through all the designs. Also, the project sits within a 100-year floodplain. So you're working with the local floodplain administrators, making sure that, modeling is done to make sure that we're not affecting any downstream potential flood impacts. Coordinating with the federal agencies, we started with the Corps, both the regulatory office, and we're going to be up there at Lavon, so we're working with the operations office, and then we're working with crossing the levee, so that's operations and Fort Worth. So both of those had to be coordinated very closely. We had all of the information gathered, got as complete a permit application as we could, send that copy to the Corps, got the Corps' permission. This is before the days of electronic submittal. So everything's hard copy. Got the Corps' permission to make multiple copies and send it directly to all the coordinating agencies. So it wasn't the Corps trying to do the coordinating, we were facilitating all that coordinating. Then, after we give them all the information, we said, okay, everybody, come to the site. We want to show you what we're planning to do. We want to address any of your questions, any big issues. And this is a big site. Just the range itself will cover, 2,000 plus acres. And then you got this pipeline all the way up to Lavon. So how are you going to do that? You're running the helicopter. I'll tell you, there's one guy from TCQ that loved this helicopter ride. He did both tours back and forth up to Lavon. But I would sit in the middle and the back, squeeze in, and I've got regulators all around. And as we're flying, I'm talking and answering questions and going through. We did the site tour around the range itself, showing what's going to be here and here, because this is all, visionary right now, because there's still a cattle range. We still have cattle everywhere. We're trying to tell them what's going to happen. We do have the nursery to at least show them this is what the plants are going to look like. But that really helped facilitate getting everybody's dialogue. We had everybody together. We got done with the helicopter tour. We got back in the big room. Everybody, can bounce questions off one another and try to address that. We actually had the 404 permit issued within 15 months. Lessons learned. The design engineers made changes in the design and didn't bother to tell them. So we get our permit, and I get a call from the operations manager at Lavon. He goes, he said, I was in the boat doing some tours, and this outfall is about 3 times the size of what was permitted in the thing. So don't like getting those calls. If you're working on a design and you make changes, please communicate with your permit writers that are doing this. We had to modify the permit, but because of coordination had done previously, We actually had good enough relationship that we were able to continue construction under our permit that we had active while we were doing the modification. For the 448, we had to do, yes, good for the pipeline crossings and for crossing the federal property of the Long Lake. You have to do underneath, but you have to do an environmental assessment. Again, we were able to not only prepare the draft, final draft, notice of availability, but we sent hard copies of all the information to all the coordinating agencies. We made it available for, the public to be able to see. So in doing all this coordination, what we were able to do is we had both mitigation requirements under 408 as well as for the 404. We worked with the operations people over in Lavon. They had several things that they would like to do, but nobody had money or the ability to do it. We were able to do all the mitigation that was required on the federal property of Lavon. It was a win-win for both the project and for the core project owners. This is different mitigation. This is the pipeline alignment. We did native prairie restoration along this and then additional areas. So there was a total of 109 acres where we did this native seed mix and restored native prairie. We had some forested riparian wetland restoration, about 31 acres along one of the drainages into Lavon. And then there was a little bit of crossing on one of the coves, the streams going in. This is really, it's only 1.3 acres, but it's the most difficult. Why? Because it's got 15 feet below conservation pool. There's no way I could go out there and plant wetland plants when everything was bone dry. So we really waited almost 4 years to be able to get Lavon back up close to conservation pools to be able to do the wetland fringe planting. On the water rights permit, we actually have a riffle zone that's just downstream. Where this is the intake for the Virgin Pump Station, Highway 175, and there's a riffle zone. The USGS crandall gauge is mounted off of 175 bridge. So we did the biological survey that went on for couple of years while we were already under construction. The agreement was that we would bypass 30% of the Trinity River based on return flows themselves. And then also maintain a minimum daily average of 25.8 CFS at that crandall gauge. And that keeps that riffle zone fully inundated. So it protected the aquatic habitat there. At the Mainst pump station, already had a water rights permit. District's buying water from the TRA. 404 permit was actually submitted thinking we were going to be able to get it authorized under nationwide permits. Looking at a tight timeline again. No, the ag levies that are down here as well as the core levy that had to be passed. So we were looking at 408 permitting again. In addition to that, the Corps came up with a whole lot of requirements. So we had to do different data analysis and modeling to prove that we weren't going to have an adverse impact to the aquatic life within the river with this diversion flow. So that took us almost as long as it did for the original project, 13 months. Special conditions tied, again, tied directly with what effluent discharges are within the Corps. And this is a county system that has to show that the Corps has access to it, as well as again the minimum flow. This time the Rosser gauge, which is just downstream of 44. But there's a minimum flow that has to be right there, also shut down the pumps. This is just a picture of the completed Mainst pump station. One of the key things to note is down here is where the Lockett Dam number 7, remaining Lockett dams on the Trinity River. That actually helps maintain a consistent pool for the intake up here for the Mainst pump station. It's very critical needed for this location. Again, we had 408 review for the flood control levy, but we were able to coordinate that with the regional general permit 12, which we'll go into all the details, but it was able to do that. The Corps had already done a programmatic environmental assessment in 2011 for all these different pipelines having costs and levies. So we were able to determine it was a very streamlined process, no major federal action, no EIS required. We only had the pipeline went up to the wetland, a little minor impact to a forested wetland along the pipeline line. We were able to do that with the purchase and mitigation bank credits. Lessons learned. This is an invaluable supply of water. The wetland itself provides water quality improvement. There's so many more ancillary benefits that come as a result of the project. You know, the goal is water supply. The objective is to improve the water quality so that you're not having an adverse impact to the Lavon reservoir. But in the meantime, you've got educational opportunities where this is a award-winning, engaging curriculum that's taught at the Wetland Center, that's training the next generation and the next generations of scientists and engineers for years to come. We have research opportunities. We've already had multiple different university level thesis projects that were done at the wetlands. We have community outreach, because you not only need to educate the kids, you need to educate the adults, the parents that come out there. But it's also giving them that warm, fuzzy feeling, I guess, that this is a good project. It's water supply. It makes them conscious of the need to be good stewards of our water resources. Of course, you develop the wetland habitat. The primary productivity at this wetland is off the charts. And when you compare the bird counts that they do, the Christmas bird counts in the Audubon Wetland Center to what we have higher diversity and 10-fold higher numbers of birds than East Fork Wetland. This preservation of green space is important for wildlife, but it's also important for people. We need green space to be able to have that recreational opportunity to go someplace and chill. During the pandemic, kids, not able to be in school, they were coming out, homeschool kids were out here on this day working. You're out outdoors, you're getting out and reconnecting with nature. To me, that's the most important part of life. Yes, we produce water supply and we serve 2+ million people with this project. But in the end, it's more than the water supply. Any questions? I'll try to answer.